Welcome to the Truth Podcast. I'm here with a very special guest. He is known as four-time Mr. Olympia. How many times did you win the Arnold?
Three.
3 times. Not that Arnolds are that much lesser than the Olympias, but 4 times.
Yeah, crazy.
And 2 with me. Mr. Olympia, Jay Cutler. Jay came all the way from Las Vegas, and we've been wanting to do this for a very, very long time. This is special for me because we have never sat down and really talked about 2009 history, what happened, probably the most well-known photograph in all of bodybuilding, the foot stomp, and what we did together. And I know that when you and I talked about it originally, it was cool because you said, hey, I don't really want to do that podcast. And I was like, okay, if you don't want to do it, no problem. But then you said on Zoom. You added in the on Zoom part. You wanted to do it in person. So I really appreciate you coming out here, brother.
No, I mean, it's, I've been following along, and obviously we have a deep relationship, and it stems actually way before 2009, right? And, we've all progressed through business, when I came off the stages, and, we achieved greatness, which I never imagined it ever being what it was. And I'm sure we'll talk about our discussion after 2009, what was next, right? But, we talk about the Arnold victories and, kind of how I came up in it, and the expectations weren't necessarily the top. I think I'm even actually gone on record to say that I don't know if I'd ever win the Mr. Olympia. I think my first DVD actually, which was the early social media, I stated that I don't ever plan to be Mr. Olympia. And then sooner or later, it was right there at my fingertips. And, I had a battle of greatness to become greater. And, I lost the title, came back to win it, which we did together, which, we'll probably talk a little bit about that. It was a pretty crazy time for us,
Yeah. It a lot of people don't, it's been, 12 years, right? 12 years this last January, we started working together. And I met you at officially, I believe it was at the old Gold's gym in San Jose off of Meridian. And you used to be with your old sponsor. And you had was it M3, that product?
Pro M3.
Pro M3 by
protein. ISS.
ISS Research. Yeah. And you had come in there and you were down for the weekend or whatever it was. I think it was just a day, maybe for an autograph signing. And we had met. So that was 21 years ago. And I had just moved back to the Bay Area. And I was building a name for myself in the local kind of scene. And you were basically, God, how many years were you a pro at that point?
I was probably a pro for 4 years, because I think I signed with that company in 2000. That's when I started. Remember, I signed with Weider first, right after winning the Nationals. I won my card in 96. And then I was with Weider from 97 through 2000. And then I signed for a 3-year deal with ISS, which a lot of people, they did Oh Yeah, and basically the one bar that just sold to Hershey last year. So I was with that company for 3 years, and then of course went to Muscle Tech later. But we did a lot of appearances, meaning we did setups and sampling and just trying to get the brand out there back then. So I did set up in gyms, nutrition shops, and it's a little different. You don't get as many gym appearances by the athletes now, but most of the gyms sold supplements back then, which many do not at this point, right?
Yeah, they had a pro shop. Denise, which her last name is now Cook, who married Chris Cook, was the manager there at the time. And
see, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they ended up meeting at that gym, and that's where I met Chris Cook, who eventually turned pro, and which I trained. He won 2 USA titles, and then he ended up turning pro with Chris.
Yeah,
and the coolest thing was the fact that at that point, I had just started getting, I think, Quincy ready that following year after I met you in 2000. It was 2001. And so I don't know if you knew me before then or not.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Because you weren't the Hany Rambod name yet, because you didn't have those big
USA wins.
Yeah.
Where they hadn't become the pro creator yet.
But it's kind of funny how the guys, every year it seemed like you were turning each guy pro for a good run there.
Yeah. Yeah. That was in 2001, because I remember Lonnie Tepper used to bust my balls because in 99, I had gotten Ray Artie ready and Matt Allen ready for shows and those guys. And they did Lonnie's show. And he had told me, he goes, hey, because he was Lonnie, very close mutual friends of ours, and he was also emceeing the Arnold. He's emceed the Olympia before. He's emceed a ton of shows, and he was a writer for Iron Man magazine. And you guest posted at his show a lot.
Every year. I still actually have that appearance on the schedule for this year too.
Do you really?
Every year. I'm there for life. That's how committed I am to Lonnie.
That's awesome, because Lonnie's really, really been a great friend, and he was an MC back when I was competing in my shows at the Iron Man Naturally. And he would bust my balls because he says, hey, I went to Jay's house, and this is my, when I was getting Quincy Taylor ready in 01. And Quincy, for those that don't know, Quincy was my super heavyweight. This first time I worked with him. He was getting ready for the USA in Las Vegas. And at the time there was only, they had just done the top 2 would win the pro cards. And I was getting him ready. And then you were helping a friend of mine, Abbas Khatami. He'd call himself the Persian Missile, which is not very politically correct nowadays. But Abbas, who had done really well at the state level, he won the Cal, looked amazing, probably the best he looked.
99,
yeah, 99 Cal, and I remember being there, super impressive winning 99. And you were helping him, and he was in Vegas, and you had just moved to Vegas, and he was basically like, Lonnie was teasing me because number one. What a lot of people don't know is I was really close with Ronnie, and you obviously, after the 2001 Olympia in September, it became arch nemesis, right, to each other. It was a yin and yang going on. Mm-hmm. And that was in September. But before that, I was getting Quincy ready in July of 2001, and you were getting Abbas ready. And then I remember him specifically, him meaning Lonnie, would really, really give me a hard time because he said, hey, I went to go see Jay and told him, hey, you're going to be the next, your next guru. And he says, well, I'm no Hany Rambod. Yeah. And I'll never forget that because that, I always talk about how there's certain little things that kind of get you to like step up your game, and they really want you to, you either kind of, it pushes you down or it helps build you up because you use it to kind of fuel your fire. And I go, oh, I'm going to show Jay. Oh man. And for me, listen, I was a top placer at that point, and for you to, to give you a shout out, what's that mean? I saw the potential of, what greatness could become. Right. So, he did an interview. It's kind of coincidence now because Abbas and Quincy both live in Las Vegas. I just saw Quincy not long ago, and Abbas did move. They live there now.
Yes, I just ran into Abbas last week. I saw Quincy. He came to my show recently. I had a show in Las Vegas I promoted, and he came by just to show support. So full circle. These guys are California guys now living in Nevada. And, like we said, Lonnie loved to stir the pot.
Totally.
And, you were still building your name, and, really what kind of just really blew you up is obviously you worked with Phil Heath from the very beginning, right? But we recognize it. We spent a holiday together. I think we spent Easter.
It was Easter. What year was that?
2002.
Okay, so
it was after I won the Arnold.
Okay, so what happened was you would turn around and said, I'm no Hany. And I was like, I'm going to show Jay, right? Because that's what he came to me. And this is before the show started. Yeah. And then I saw you during check-ins, and you were with Abbas and I was with Quincy. Yeah. And then you're like the Jay, and you just kind of look and you're like, so how does he look? And Jay's always very stoic, right? You've always like, it's hard to read because you got the Boston.
I read things. I read with I don't say a lot, right?
Right. Absolutely. So what you do is you look at things and you process, right? But you don't outwardly discuss things. Yeah. So then he said, how's he look? And I was like, good. You want to look at him? And he's like, sure. So we took Quincy and we went into the restroom at the event hotel where they were doing the check-ins. And it was Alexis Park. I'll never forget. It was the Alexis Park Hotel. Yeah. And right next to the Hard Rock Cafe across the street. And I remember it was like 113 degrees that year. Because, you know, July in Vegas, it gets super hot anyways. But it was one of the hottest summers. And you looked at him and
what'd I say?
And you're like, kept looking at me, and then you just you looked at him and looked at me, and you kind of shake your head. And anybody that knows you knows the look I'm talking about right now. So if you're listening to this on the podcast and you're not watching the YouTube video, Jay just looks, and I said, so what do you think? And you just kept looking at him and looking at me. And then he said, turn around. And then, you know, he like shows glutes and hamstrings, and he goes, he's going to win. That's all you said. It was like the day of the, you know, weigh-ins, and you're like, he's going to win. And I said, what do you think? You know, you sure? You know, or he said something like that. And he's like, I think, what'd you say? You're like, no one's going to beat that dude. Mm-hmm. And he was 200, you know, Quincy's 6'3", 260, 65 pounds. And he was, you know, best he ever looked, shredded. And he won. He won the class, and he won the overall. He crushed it. But it was one of those things where it was like, okay, that was for the beginning of the run I had, right? 2001, I had the overall winner. Mm-hmm. Quincy. 2002 was Idris Wardell. And then 2003, I had Mike Dragna and Chris Cook both win their classes in the USA. But 2002 is when you had just won the
first Arnold.
And I don't know what I was doing. I think that was back when I had my day job. And then I also was meeting with some people that I was training in Southern California. And we ended up having breakfast, brunch together. Easter, yeah. But that was right after 01. And in 01, that's when you hit. Mm-hmm. That's when you hit the big time, because you're obviously your first Olympia, you didn't do very well.
No, I was 15th. Yeah.
Yeah. 15th at the Olympia. And starting out, it was kind of like, oh, you know, it was a stutter step. And then what year was that?
99.
Mm-hmm.
Then 2000, I got 8th, so I split.
You went halfway
in the
up.
middle, yeah. And then the unexpected in 01, right, was kind of a controversial, depends on opinions, but on scorecards, very controversial second.
Yep.
So that kind of solidified, you know, where I was. But then, of course, the Arnold victory in 02 really like stamped like, okay, I'm the second best bodybuilder on the planet, right? Because the Arnold Olympia, like you split, okay, that's a 1-2 contest. So whoever wins the Arnold is usually considered one of the top two or top, you know, sometimes depending on who competes. But if you were second at the Olympia and you go and do the Arnold and you keep that placing, you know, winning that show, you're kind of guaranteed to be a look going into September every year. And that's where I kind of landed. I still feel like 02 Arnold was my best. I know there's a lot of but my biggest and hardest.
You think that was better than 01?
I just think the package was better. It was very dominant. I feel that, yes, you know, you can look at different years, but I just had the overall size. And, you know, even if you're not in the best top condition, that size is overwhelming. I mean, let's say Ronnie 03 was unbeatable on any stage, even though people question, was it 98 his best or, you know, and then they say 01 or 09 was my best. But I think the best combination with, you know, dominance, I think I was 273 at that contest.
Yeah.
Which is big for my height, right?
Yep.
And I felt like I was in good, I was hard from behind. The back wasn't as hard, but, you know, the overall size and balance was there.
Well, let's go back to 01. So just so let the listeners know, in 01, Ronnie and I were very, very close. Mm-hmm. I was training Alti and his girlfriend at the time, and Ronnie and I were very close. So I was definitely 100% in the Ronnie camp. And when you had come over and pushed him for that placing, and I was in Ronnie's room when all of that shit went down with Ronnie having to drink the gallon of water and all that. Chad had to tell him to do all those things because Alti was trying to get a hold of Chad, and he couldn't at first, and then eventually did. But she called me and I said, you know, see what Chad says, but he was really not, you know, he passed out. He had passed out. I didn't honestly think that he was going to even be able to make the show, because at that time, the show wasn't 2 days. It was one day. It was a prejudging in the morning, and then it was the finals at night. And we're talking about 3 or 4 hours before prejudging. I'm in the room, and he's like, he's not even getting out of bed, and he's supposed to be going downstairs to meet up with the rest of the athletes to walk backstage, and he's still in bed. And so, again, this is a couple hours before they were supposed to meet, and Alti's freaking out. Ronnie didn't feel well. And then they finally got a hold of Chad. Chad came over and said, drink water. And then he drank a entire gallon of water like he drank a shot glass. Like he drank the whole thing. And obviously he was holding water right after that. And then he dropped water at night. But I knew that it was going to be problematic when I saw it. But it wasn't, that wasn't my ship to drive. That was Chad and Ronnie working together. And I was just kind of on the sideline just watching things, because it was like one of those things. I'm like, wow, is Ronnie going to lose? And obviously it was a battle. It was it was very, very close. I think you were ahead in the morning, right?
Yeah, 6 points.
Yeah. And then you lost by how much by night?
9, I think.
So it was 3-point difference total? Okay. Yeah. And it was one of those things that it was really like, and then his body changed. And then obviously it was controversial. A lot of people thought that you could have won. And, obviously the Ronnie fans thought that he came back. But from there, it was like, I remember right after that, there was the San Francisco show, and you came over and you showed me pictures. You're like, check this out, boy. This is where I had your boy. And you would tease me, and I would be like, oh, and we just became closer at that point, but it was cool and then obviously the following year, I was down south, and then we ended up, and now you're living in Mission
Aliso Viejo. Yeah.
Aliso Viejo. Yeah. Yeah. It's back when you had your vet, I think.
It's my dream. Amazing your dreams and aspirations that you strive for. And when I bought my vet in 2000, it's kind of funny because I was on tour. Actually, I got second to Ronnie on tour. We did a European tour after 2000 Olympia where I placed 8th, Ronnie won, and no one decided to go on the tour other than really him and I. So there were like 3 contests, and I placed second at 2 of those shows. Maybe there were only 2 shows. But I placed second, so I actually got to stand side by side in 2000. So that's why I had the confidence a little more going into 01 also. But they delivered my Corvette while I was overseas competing to my friend's dealership. And I was so excited to come home, not only because I landed second to Ronnie, but I had my car waiting for me, and that was my dream. My only dream was actually to drive my Corvette from California to Las Vegas with the top down. It was like one of those things. I'd play in a Journey, like the Journey
Can't Stop
Greatest
Believing.
Hits. Now, I used to listen to that when I was training, for a lot of contests. Journey was my favorite group. And, I loved the Corvette, man. It was just like the all-American car. And living in Massachusetts, coming from Mass, I knew moving it to California, that was our dream, to drive around. I kept my top down. I parked at my garage, never put the top up. That was my car because I had a secondary vehicle, and I remember going to the gym every day with that vet and feeling like, okay, I'm accomplished. I made it, which is crazy, right?
Yeah, and now you have a Rolls Royce, a Lamborghini, and a freaking G-Wagon.
Crazy, how far you come, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny because then you have a sense of hunger, and we'll talk a little bit about that very, very few people, if anybody, have ever met has in any industry, let alone bodybuilding. But I think that when you then went through, to fast forward to our history, then a couple years later, you met a guy named Phil Heath. And what did you think of Phil when you first met him? Because you met him before I did.
Yeah, I was guest posing in Denver. I told the story a million times, but he was standing backstage, and I was a guest poser, and you see bodies, right? We had been around it enough by that point. And I had seen some of the great pros, and he was standing over there, and I saw the crazy arms and the insertions, right? And I said, "Who's that guy?" And they said, "Oh, he's the local guy." I think I asked Jeff Taylor, because Jeff Taylor was the chairperson that brought me out there. It was in Boulder, Colorado. And somehow I went up and said, "You look good. What are you doing?" And Phil's very talkative, right? He's very friendly. And I said, "Man, you have a lot of potential and whatever." And I think he said, "Oh, I wanted to do a show, but I just didn't have the money or something." He was trainer at Bally's or something at the time. Somehow I guest posed, and that night we end up eating at Cheesecake Factory right there in downtown Boulder. And, we got to strike a conversation, and I remember walking away and thinking, wow, he's intelligent, right? And I think he has a head, because I always looked at people's physiques, but I also had to read the person and their drive and what they're about with their vision, right? And sometimes you can get that gist when you talk to people, like what their goals are. And I just was impressed by that with him. I think he kind of had that mindset, which is very important for bodybuilding. And I walked away from that and I said, hey, we exchange numbers. And I mean, I remember Sunday I reached out to Peter McGuff at Flex, Muscle and Fitness at the time. And I said, hey, man, I just found the next Mr. Olympia.
Did you actually say that?
Yeah.
Wow. You thought he was that good then?
Yeah. And Peter had him signed on Monday to the books, and he had money to compete. And I think that's when you guys linked up. But it's funny, I called Chris Aceto too, and I'm like, hey, I found the next Mr. Olympia, and I sent him pictures, and he goes, no. He didn't think so.
He didn't think so, huh?
No, he didn't think so. And so I felt pretty solid when eventually Phil came up and made it, although I always mention I didn't expect him to come so fast, right? Like, and take me out. But it was, I was impressed with Phil's body, but I was more impressed with his mind and the person he was. And that's why I knew there was a lot of great things that Phil Heath would give to the bodybuilding world in the future. And, I believed that he'd had the body to win the biggest.
I think the crazy thing about it is that, you have that picture, and you were probably at one of your biggest, and he was just starting out.
Yeah, I think that I had met him prior because he competed or something.
Yes.
So this was after that picture, which I didn't even realize that picture even was. He's like, oh, I had met you, but we never conversed, right?
Right. It was just a picture.
Yeah, it was just a picture.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure we can find the picture and post it up. But it's one of the things that I was impressed with, because when I met Phil, it was basically when he was hitting the stage as an amateur trying to turn pro, because I had some people on the show in 2005 and he was doing the USA. And at that point, I knew that he, had some friends that were helping him, and some people said, hey, that guy that, what do you think of him? I said, I think he's really, really good. I think that, it's one of those things where see how far he goes. But me, I'm a person who always says there's so many people, the Richard Joneses of the world who was from your neck of the woods. Mm-hmm. And I would always ask you, go, hey, what do you think of that person? He's got some amazing genetics. And Richard Jones was a guy that was like a version 2 of Sean Ray, and he peaked once. And I think is when he turned pro, and that was pretty much it. And then obviously some things didn't work out for him, and you told me, you said that guy's looked like that for a long time. He comes from, I think, Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And it was all about the mindset. And that's when I started realizing more and more how much it's about the mindset, because so many people have genetics, especially at the top, but what you do with the genetics and how you go about, whether you train or you self-sabotage. And you hear the stories of Flex Wheeler and how he self-sabotaged and hid, burger wrappers under his seat. And, he himself told me stories and all of these things. And I think Branch comes to mind that, I did an interview with, and obviously I know you personally so well now, and us working together, and you didn't have the best genetics in terms of like, hey, having the small Flex Wheeler waist or even having the Phil Heath genetics, but you made up for it with a ton of hard work. And I think that's where, you guys really, really excelled, where others rested so much on their genetics and then they never really came to fruition. And I think that what's amazing is that that's carried over to even your business and all of the other things, because you were always hungry. You always were ready to get on a plane and hustle and all of the things that you do, even up till now. I mean, we joke about this because you told me 10 years ago you were going to be done with this shit. You're like, I'm never going to do this anymore. I'm going to stop. And you still, you were at a trade show a couple of weeks ago. I think you went to Utah, and, even the pandemic is starting to wane off, but it's not completely gone yet. But you're still willing to go out and meet fans and everything else. But that comes from your work ethic. And as I saw you grow, and I was working with Phil at the time, my thing was I've always admired your hard work, because whatever you just try to do, whatever you could to cross your T's and dot your I's. And you're working with Chris Aceto, who, as I was coming up, he was always like one of the top, him and Chad were always the top guys. And I felt like you really did everything you possibly could to be able to really maximize your genetics. You would go in at late at night. You'd go in early. You would eat more. You would train harder. You train longer. My question for you is like, when did you start to realize, was it just when you took second at that Olympia? Was it then when you realized that you could win, or what was that? Did that trigger you at that point? Because before that you said, hey, look, I wasn't really sure I was going to win the Olympia.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, and it's a little lengthy story. So I mentioned, I finished 15th the first year. The second year I got 8th, right? And I went on that tour. And Chris Aceto was my biggest. Remember, we worked together since I was 6 months into training, 18.
Right.
I was 18 and a half when I started working with Chris. It was literally 6 months because he lived 2 hours from me. So I would have a lot of time with him. And at the time, he wasn't working with a lot of people. He was working with, his wife at the time. He helped Mike Francois.
Mm-hmm.
He had helped Paul DeMay a little bit, but he didn't work with anyone that was currently on the circuit really competing. I mean, Paul had kind of tapered off and Mike had gotten sick, right? So he was like, listen, when I stood next to Coleman on these European tours, he's like, listen, you can beat this guy. I'm certain, because I was really sharp compared to what I looked like at the Olympia week prior. I had dropped about 12 more pounds, and, although I was floating in the 40s, Ronnie wasn't 270 or 260, whatever he ended up being later, right?
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't huge yet. He was
yet.
huge in sense, but not weight-wise. I think he won his first Olympia at 248, and he wasn't pushing like that big weight yet. So I was able to be compared, and listen, I wasn't ready to beat him yet, but what I did is, Chris said, listen, take the full year in 2001,
mm-hmm.
and I want you to train, and I want you to eat, and I want you to eat not on that strict diet. I want you to have your burgers and
mm-hmm.
fries, which I did every single day. I'm not going to lie.
Mm-hmm.
Every single day in the off season, I had my frozen yogurt. I had my good meals, and then I would eat one bad meal a day. And that's the only way I could get my body weight big enough and not be super lean, because my body had a great tendency to stay pretty lean. And I was able to gather some more roundness to my physique. And I didn't do the cardio in the off season. He said, no cardio, just lift weights. I did twice a day workout. So I was shuttling the food a little easier. It always worked best for me. And I went into 2001 with the mindset, like, people asked me, how are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to win. And when I was about 3 weeks out, I started shooting pictures with Alex Ardente and
Chris Lund and the guys.
Yeah, like all the guys. And they're like, holy shit, you're going to do really well this year. And people are like, oh, you'll be top 5. And next thing you know, when I showed up the show, that gave me a lot of confidence. Yeah. And, when I came out there, the luck of the draw, I drew number 1 and 2 numbers with Ronnie. So as you know, when they brought out our numbers, we stood next to each other.
Yep.
And of course, Ronnie being not on point,
right,
I was able to really overshadow him in the front poses. Let's be honest, Ronnie was always dominant from the back, but the front was what they were looking at most of the time. So when I stood in that lineup and you saw the midsection,
mm-hmm.
If you asked me, that was the best front package I ever had.
Mm-hmm.
It was just aesthetic.
Right.
And still muscular.
Right.
The shoulder width was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
The tan was perfect.
Yep.
And I was standing next to the best bodybuilder on the planet at the time.
Right.
For 3 years. So the stars aligned, and that's landed second there. And I truly knew at that point, when I got second at the Mr. Olympia, that I could possibly win. Okay. I did expect it to be sooner than what had happened, though.
Well, at that point, going on to your history in the Olympia, you ended up taking like a year off. And I think you probably regretted that, because that was the year Kevin had come in and Ronnie wasn't at his best. And Ronnie still won, but that was like a
smaller, yeah.
Yep. It was like a 90% Ronnie. And then when you took that 2002 off, you came back at 2003, and then you kind of went up against, the Hulk version of Ronnie, which he came in arguably be one of his biggest.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I'm going to go back to the mental aspect. I feel that 2001 defeated Ronnie Coleman mentally.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we know Ronnie's mind is crazy strong, right? But when he had to go around till he had the chance to stand on stage again, there was always that whispers of like, oh, you know, it was close. Jay Cutler maybe should have won, right? Because you had your believers that followed it.
Right.
And I believe that I defeated him. Like that was like a punch to Ronnie. And he didn't know what to come in like in 2002.
Right.
And that's why he came in small. He's like, you know, I'm just going to go back down to 248 like I was when I won my first in 98. And I'm going to be ripped. And that's when you learn, like, you can't just go backwards after you gain muscle and it just doesn't look the same, right? We all progress. And I feel like I kind of defeated him a little bit. And I sat out for various reasons, but the main reason was I moved to Vegas. You know, I built a new house. I was in the middle of like people were in and out of my place all the time. And I just went and won the Arnold in 2002. And I'm like, you know what, for me, I'd rather do the guest appearances and get my name out there a little more. The Olympia wasn't really, after 2001 and losing when I was ahead, I was like, you know what, am I really going to win this thing? I think I had a little chip on my shoulder, to be honest.
Yeah. You did 100%. I remember.
Yeah. And
we had talked and
I was a little disgruntled.
Yeah.
And, you know, do I regret it? I don't know. You know, I look back and I had an amazing career and I don't want to get too far ahead, but, you know, second place has built a huge fan base for me, right? The underdog's always pushed.
Yeah.
But, you know, Ronnie, I still think I don't think Kevin deserved to win in 2002. I think his legs were a little downsized already by then. And Ronnie was pretty deserving, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think they chased it because, again, I think what happened also with that 2001 situation is that Ronnie did the Arnold in 2001.
Yeah.
And then he came in and he did the Olympia. And obviously it's really tough to double peak. That's why as a standing.
And a big body.
Yes. Especially a big body. Right. Right. It's definitely much easier for someone like Hany because he's just not, you know, 250 some odd pounds or whatever.
Yeah. So 2002 Ronnie, you know, obviously won. It was questionable, right? And then Gunter beats him 2 weeks later, or whatever, at the GNC
show of strength.
Yes. So either he rolled up and said, you know what, I'm just not getting better, or he comes back and fights.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened in 2003. So Ronnie got really pissed. And
yeah.
And I expected to win in 2003 coming back. I had been on a hot streak. I won the Arnold again. Gunter was flying high. He took the year off after beating him at the show of strength, thinking he was going to come win. And that's probably the biggest highlighted year of the Mr. Olympia of all time.
Right.
Because it was like question mark. Okay, we have 3 potential big winners, right? Not to really say Kevin Levrone didn't have a shot either, but at the same time, you had 3
major
powerhouse big dudes, right?
Yep.
And, you know, Ronnie came in and just swept the floor with us all.
Yeah, I remember we were at the dinner afterwards, and I was like, "Hey, man, you good?" And you looked at me, and then you looked at him, and he'd just put on his suit because he'd always put on a suit afterwards for the victory dinner. And then you just turned around and you looked at me and you go, "What the fuck was that?" And because, like I said, nobody expected him to step it up.
And listen, I shot with Ronnie. I think we shot 8 or 10 weeks out. We did the whole flex, and we were fighting over the sand dial.
Yeah.
And he was big, but, you know, I had seen Ronnie in the off season. I was like, okay, he's always big. But whatever he did the last 10 weeks and maintained all that size and got bigger and leaner at the same time was pretty incredible.
Yeah.
You know, that physique, when people say who's the greatest, like that physique, just, I don't care how ripped someone is and comparable, there's no one's going to be that big and that hard ever.
Well, a little secret to that year was that was the year that I was working with Alti, and I got her to get a step mill for the house, at Ronnie's house. And Ronnie started using the step mill
instead of a treadmill.
Yep. And that's because he liked it, because he tried it because I had her using it. And then so he ended up buying 2 because he wanted to do it with her. And so that really helped him bring his glutes in at, I feel, at a heavier weight. But that was the year that they brought the step mill in the house because I had her using it for her prep. And so I think that definitely helped a bit with just overall conditioning. Now, obviously, you know, not to take anything away from Chad and all them, they did a great job. But I think that step mill, just even that 1 or 2% also helped out because he had that back shot where I think it was the MD cover You're rolling your eyes. Yeah, it's like crazy when he just went back and he just hit
like
those
hanging, like where that's body fat on people. That was his muscles hanging.
Yes. That, and I think that just like solidified it, just because the glutes were so hard at that heavier weight, and then his back looked like slabs of fat until he flexed it, and then it was all striated. So they did a great job. So obviously kudos to them and the team for what he did, because he really was angry. I mean, that's why I think the cost of redemption, that video he did, was all that. And then, but you didn't give up. That was the thing. You didn't give up. You went in and you said, I'm going to do this again. And then you had 2004, you had 2005. And then by then, again, Phil and I started working together and started his pro debut in 2006. And that was at the Denver show. And you had just come off of a victory, first time beating Ronnie right at that point. And, you know, the first Olympia, tell me how that felt, because obviously it was very, very like, dude, you were grinding for so long. Did you feel, I guess, a sense of relief, accomplishment, or how was it? Because it took a while. How did that feel at that point?
It was a relief, but it was expected, right? I mean, I was pretty certain I was going to win in 2006 because I felt close enough. I mean, I had put on bigger size for 2004, just not hard enough. And then, you know, Ronnie was getting bigger, but he was losing condition too. So I felt like we were evening off a little bit. And then in 2005, we both downsized a little bit. And I felt like my physique was, you know, still a little sharper in certain areas where Ronnie was starting to lose that edge a little bit. And then obviously, you know, I just went into 2006 like guns blazing and just said, I'm going to just go pound for pound with this guy. And I think it was one of my biggest body weights. I think it was about 273 there. It was 267 the night I won, because it was it was funny. That was the first Olympia I didn't use a diuretic, you know, and for me, I think.
What year was that?
2006.
2006. So the first year you won.
First year I won. And, you know, for me, I mean, that's always been, you know, working with me, water was always an issue with me.
Right.
And I was able to be sharp enough, and I felt amazing, right? So I could go out there and really showcase. And I was big and full and just hard, right? I wasn't ripped, but I was just good enough. And I was happy, but at the same time, I was kind of sad because Ronnie, I mean, this was going for number 9. It was like record breaking, right?
Right.
So I remember winning, and when they announced Jay Cutler, thinking, and I knew I was going to win anyway.
How'd you know?
I just got the vibe. Okay. I mean, you could just sense it, you know? And when they announced me, you know, I was like, okay, I don't, how am I going to handle this? Where every year Ronnie fell on the floor and I was standing there as number 2 by myself. I said, I'm going to make sure I raise his hand. And that the time I won, you know, I went to go, and then Gustavo Bedell jumped on me, if you look at the video. And then I made sure I raised Ronnie's hand. Like, man, I appreciate, because he was my idol, right? I mean, I talk about this all the time. I mean, he called me when I won my first pro show, Night of Champions. And if it wasn't for Ronnie Coleman, I never would have been as great as I was.
Absolutely.
Because he pushed me and gave me something to achieve, being as great as he was.
Yeah, you guys pushed each other.
Yeah. So I respectfully won, but at the same time, I was like, it didn't hit me for weeks after, because I just won the damn Olympia. Like, that's your lifeline goal. When you start at 18, like, you look at who Mr. Olympia was. Lee Hany was winning then, 1991. Then, of course, Dorian Yates took over, so I admired him a lot. And then eventually you have that, like, oh, man, that would be amazing. And here I was, the kid from Massachusetts, 6,000 people in my town, Sterling, Mass. And, no one in my family lift weights. And a lot of things cross your mind. And here I was, the best bodybuilder in the world, on the stage in Las Vegas. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I think just, again, I was there. I've been to the Olympia the last 25 years or however many years it is. And Ronnie knew, right? He knew, whether he heard or he felt a thing, you could just tell, like, you watch the video and he's just like looking down. He's just kind of got.
He said to me, "You won, you beat me." Yeah. Someone told him backstage before the announcement.
Yeah, that's what he told me later right after the show. And it's funny because, again, Ronnie and I were very, very, very close. And it was one of those things where it was just like absolutely devastating, right? It was just kind of like, he was going for that big win and trying to beat the record. And so, but you're right. His body did start getting deteriorating a little bit towards the end. And obviously he was getting some of that atrophy, through the one arm, tricep and the lat and whatnot. But I think, at that point, it's also, one of those things where now you have to turn around and step up your game, knowing that the person that and that's hard to do.
Well, Ronnie Coleman,
right.
It's achievable unless Ronnie Coleman was the guy before you, in my opinion.
Do you think because he was so good, that's kind of why you had kind of like that stutter, like right after that following year in 2007, you weren't as good?
No, I actually had an infection, so that's what hindered me. I mean, I felt like, I knew in 2007. I mean, I tried to come in as big in 2007, which I think was another mistake because Ronnie wasn't there anymore. I wasn't battling guys like that. So between that mistiming, but I did have a shoulder infection that did affect me a lot, and it wasn't the best look for me. And obviously that was the hardest Olympia I've ever faced in my life, posing wise, and the aftermath of Victor Martinez, almost winning that contest from me. But looking still, I mean, and people may call me crazy, I still felt that I mean, Victor's never been 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, but I did lose. I had a hard time figuring out who I was at that Olympia without the Coleman battles. Like, that kind of died. That was a new era, right?
Right.
So I didn't really have any competition that I eyed because it seemed like it was flip-flopping every year after that, who was going to be second or third. Gustavo came up, and, then it was, Gunther was still there. And I mean, there was just always someone new that was going to be the threat. Dexter Jackson. And then, of course, Phil. Right.
But you never thought Phil was going to come out that fast, is what you thought?
No, I mean, I remember sitting around in 2006 thinking, oh, this is the future, but the future when I'm gone. And next thing you know, I mean, I hung out a lot longer than I expected to.
Right.
It's partly your fault, I think, but yeah. I mean, I really contemplated retiring after 2008 when I lost to Dexter. And
yeah, that's it. That whole thing. So, you fast forward from the 2007 and you went into 2008. Obviously you weren't at your best in 2007. You were holding some water due to your shoulder infection you just mentioned. And I know a lot of people were just like, man, I don't know if Jay should have won. It could have been this, that. It's a lot of negativity. It affected you, huh?
Yeah. I mean, look, in 2008, look how I came in. I was questioning, okay, how do I need to come in?
Right.
I was kind of at that crossroad, like, okay, I don't need to be big anymore, but I need to be ripped. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So it was tough. It was tough. I mean, trying to figure out your identity, right? And then I lost to Dexter. Did you
think you were going to lose going into it?
No.
In 2008?
I actually took my clothes off backstage, and people around me were like, damn, you look so good,
Uh-huh.
And I don't know what happened between the time I took my clothes off in the posing room and in the changing room to when I got on stage. I don't know if it was nerves or, whatever. I attribute it. I was eating some rice leading up to that show, and it was like from a restaurant. And I have a feeling it was loaded with salt. And of course, we know how body reacts, and you especially know and working with me, I just think it was just temporary fullness. Right. I was flat, and then I think I was more flat, and I got pumped up, temporary fullness, and then once I got on stage, I was just deflated and watery and just looked like shit,
Right.
And Dexter won. Now, I never questioned, he deserved to win, but I always said, like, I gave the title to him, right? I walked away, and then I was backstage like, damn, like, what do I do? And then you take over where that kind of went, because we touched base within a month or two after that contest.
Well, yeah. So for those of you that don't know, in 2008, that was Phil's pro debut, and by that time, I had worked with Phil for the 2006 shows, the 2007 shows, and then 2008, and I sat Phil out of the Olympias, even though he was qualified, because I wanted him to take a little more time and grow. And I've always been a person who's an advocate of picking and choosing your battles and not over competing and letting your body be able. My old saying is just don't be in such a rush to get your ass beat. And that's why I didn't put him in the Olympias right away. So the first time I did, it was basically in a great top 3 finish with you and Dexter in his first Olympia. And now, instead of me feeling part of the Ronnie Coleman camp and all the success that they had, I was able to finally be able to bring one of my own in the mix. And again, I had, some really good people that were amateurs that turned pro, and then I had some pros that were becoming really good Olympia, possible Olympia quality. And then having Phil go into the top 3, it really put him go, wow, the gift is really now starting to be a threat. And I felt just elated by Phil being top 3. But then I saw you backstage, and I hate to use the word broken, but you were definitely just shattered. Like you were just, devastated, because you just won twice, and you're just like, holy shit. And you're going through a lot. And even though I was never in your camp up until that point, it was one of those things that I really felt really bad for you, because I just felt like, holy shit, this guy just took his whole life and chased the best bodybuilder on the planet, Ronnie Coleman, in the history of the planet and the history of the sport. And now, he had a tough run. You beat him, you beat Ronnie. Then the second year, it was like this questionable win. And then you go in and you lose to Dex. And I'm sure nobody saw that coming, and Dex looked great. So nothing to take anything away with Dexter Jackson's a legend, and it's great. But just seeing you backstage, and you were just down, and you didn't really, and again, you don't show much emotion because that's just who you are. But I could just tell the energy was taken away from you.
Yeah. And I was there, and Carrie was with me, my wife at the time. And, remember we to reverse back a little bit, like I signed like a crazy contract with Muscle Tech after that victory. Like my contract had, just had come to, it was up in 2006. So I signed a monster deal, and I was booked every weekend with guest opposings and all that stuff those 2 years. Like, I was the hottest guy, right? I was doing international, domestic, keeping busy with that sense, doing all the marketing, shooting DVDs, that kind of stuff. And so when I lost, it was like, I was like, oh, that not only was it like I lost the title that I chased for all these years and so quickly, when the guy before me had won 8, it was like, okay, well, what's going to happen with my, my popularity? What are people going to think? And, where do I go from here? Is my body's not getting better. What I realized, my body wasn't getting better, right? So that's when you're really like, after the show, not even at backstage, you're just like, wow, okay, I'm not getting better and everyone else is improving. Dexter Jackson, who I never imagined having a smaller stature guy overtake me, had just beat me. And, Phil was on the rise, and I don't know who else. Tony Freeman, I think, was top 5 in that show.
When you talked to Chris, with that situation, what was that like? What was the conversation at that point? That later that night or the next day?
I died to bring in the night show condition from the prejudging. I sat in a sauna like all day. I was on my deathbed, pretty much dehydrated. And I just said, this is too hard. And he said, this is just, it's a struggle. And he really didn't have the answer, because remember, he flies in a couple days prior, and he was with me at that show. And, we kind of do the diet together through pictures. And, I'm always a guy that looks totally different in person than in pictures. Mm-hmm. And, he didn't really have an answer, because remember, he's not training me every day, and he's not living in my body. Right. And he didn't really have anything to say other than, hey, we didn't even talk about what's next. I didn't even get that far. It just was like, okay, this is what had just happened. And, I just need some time to think about things,
Then fast forward, I think, I can't even remember, like, again, Phil, we all went out.
We partied that night.
Yeah. That's so, it was kind of weird, because it was like,
that's the kitchen. We went in the kitchen. I had an after party, because they used to pay me to do these after parties. So we were at Privé, which is in Planet Hollywood. And, we had this big party there, and I remember like not wanting to be around that many people. So instead of the big booth in the back. They didn't care because my friends owned the club and they would, have me come for my after party. They thought I was going to win. We hung out in the kitchen in the back, and
they put a table back there.
Yeah, they put a table.
Yeah, so normally, guys, when you go to a club, like any club, there's booths within the club. We went through the club, and I was like, "Where the hell are we going?" And they're like, "No, we're going to Jay's, party." I said, "Yeah, it's in the club," and they're like, "No, it's in the kitchen."
Yeah,
and I go like where they cook food, and they're like, "Yeah," and you got you sitting back there on a couch.
Yeah,
they got like bottles next to you. You had Carrie, and you had your girlfriends and guy friends that from your friends around you, and there was like a stripper pole.
Yeah,
there's a stripper pole in the kitchen.
Yeah,
and I was like, what the fuck is going on?
I have no idea what I mean. When we reminisce about it, I have no idea why there was a stripper pole in the back kitchen. I don't know if it was like one that moved around or something, but it was wild.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It kind of looked like it belonged there. I don't know. I don't know if it was like some part of the theme thing, but I was crazy because I look at Phil and I go, "Is that a stripper pole?" And he's like, "You damn right, it's a stripper pole, bro." Yeah. Like I've seen a lot of those, and I was like, okay, and you were trying to have kind of like just a decent time. Obviously, you just lost.
Yeah.
But at that point, what was going on in your head?
I was relieved. After every show, I was always relieved because the diets were always stressful for me. And I said, I can get back to like living life a little bit. So, I was making the best of it. And I knew that, hey, listen, I still had a lot of deals in place. And, I don't know where this is heading. But even after I retired, I had other stuff going on. So it wasn't like I never had the financial like scare of like, oh, how am I going to make money? It was more about like, what are people going to think? What's my legacy, right? Because my legacy was like really all I ever cared about. And then, it was like the moment was just like, okay, it's very comforting having people that care about you around you. I had a good crew, and, we were just celebrating like, the show being over at that point.
Yeah. Well, at that point, then I think we went to Peppermill.
Yeah. At like 5 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah. So
it was our ritual every year. We would all go as a group and celebrate. Right.
Right. We would go. And then I think it kind of started around that year where the Peppermill thing, because I remember that's kind of when I remember going. Mm-hmm. And because I remember what Ronnie's ritual was always, he would have pizza at the room, and then he'd, Dom Perignon, and then he'd always want to go to McDonald's. And that was his deal. And then when Phil's like, "Hey man, where's this party at? And let's go to Jay's."
Yeah.
And then that was 2008, and we went to your party. And then after that, we all went to Peppermill together. Myself, you, Phil, and then
the whole posse.
The whole posse with everyone's crew kind of mixed. And then at that point, then I think I can't remember how it happened. You probably remember better than I do. About a month later, we talked.
Yeah, it was around Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It was around Thanksgiving, and you just randomly, we never really spoke much on the phone, and you just reached out to me like, "Hey, are you okay?"
Yeah.
That's literally the conversation, and it was never, that's a funny thing about, and we had like an hour, all our talks, like whenever, even today, like we talk on the phone, it ends up being like 2-3 hours, right? Catching up, and because we don't do it on a regular basis as much, but everyone texts nowadays, right? It's always a text message, but you were like, "Are you okay?" And then I was like, "Yeah, I'm good, whatever, but I'm kind of uncertain. What do you think?" We kind of reminisced a little bit about what it looked like up there. And I think it kind of ended like, "Hey, well, whatever you decide, just, whatever, I'm always here for you." And that was the extent of the conversation. And I think, I sat back, I think I talked to Carrie a little bit, and, we kind of conversed, and I kind of made the decision, like, I just don't think this thing with Chris is working as well. We've been together since I was a kid, and Chris and I actually had a discussion, and he's like, maybe you just need to try some different stuff, and it wasn't like, hey, I need to go switch a coach, but when you said to me, hey, and it seemed like your formulas were working, I was impressed with how Phil came in, and you had your success with the USA guys, and Troy Alves, I think you were working with
Troy,
him for
Bill
like,
Wilmore.
Yeah, all
Bill
these
Wilmore
guys.
was he 05 Nationals.
So I said, you know what? I remember reaching out to you and I said, hey, would you mind if I bounce some ideas off you? Because I'm like, listen, I'm coming back. You know, I'm going to come back and make another run at this thing. You know, you qualified as Mr. Olympia. You don't have to requalify. So I didn't have to go do an Arnold or whatever else. But I think we, you know, I that conversation I solely remember is like I said to you, hey, do you mind if I bounce some things off? And it was never official like, hey, I want to hire you as my guy. Mm-hmm. We kind of just, and then it snowballed. Like we started talking almost daily. And then we shot the FST.
Yes.
I think in January, and we brought, you know, everyone came to Vegas. We talked about that. Hey, let's do some training together. And, you know, we ended up shooting, you know, the FST video because that was part of like, hey, I can help you implement this training and I had trained like volume, but not anything like to that extent. And Phil and yourself and I, you know, shot the first
FST 7 video. I think the thing that I remember the most was that now I remember exactly what you said. We said, hey, you know, can I bounce some ideas off of you? And I said, sure, because you wanted to try some different things. It was, like you said, it was never about changing the coach thing. It was just, I want to try some different things. Yeah. And then it went down that road. And then I remember it was like end of December and you said, I want to come out and train with you. And the reason why I remember this so vividly, and it was going to be the first week of January because it was my birthday. And right around that time, the reason why I stopped competing was because I tore my ACL and I hadn't fixed it. And that was the year, 2009, 9 years after I tore it, that I was actually going to fix it that week that you were supposed to come. So I said, you know, oh man, I was talking to Farronez and I said, hey, look, you know, I got this thing. And she's like, well, you know, what are you going to do? And I said, this is more important. I'm just going to move the surgery back. And this is an opportunity for me to, you know, do something with Jay. It would be cool. Mm-hmm. And it was always also questionable in my head because I was so loyal to Ronnie that, well, is this going to be like, this is like cheating on my, you know, girlfriend type thing? Mm-hmm. Like what's going on? But Ronnie had already left. Like he was already kind of like done.
Retired, yeah.
Yeah, retired at that point. And then I was thinking, okay, well, is there going to be an issue with Phil, mm-hmm. right? Because again, he had just been third, and you had already won, you know, 2 times, and then you had just taken second. So, you know, second and third, is that going to be a problem? And then I think I remember reaching out to him, and I don't know if you did, but I know that I did. And he you know,
he actually told me he pushed me. You should talk to Hany. You should talk to Hany. You should talk to Hany. But we never had an agreement, you and I. It wasn't like, hey, no, you're going to be my trainer for this show. Right. I'm going to pay you. Like, it was like, hey, let's just train mm-hmm. and let's just go with it. And Phil gave me the blessing. He's like, you know, you really should. He's really good. And I was like, yeah, does he know what he's doing? You know, I, of course, asked the questions, right? and he kind of gave the blessing, like, yeah, you know, and then it was like we were all a team,
yeah,
which was probably the greatest point of my career, to be honest, you know, because it was, you know, we spent a lot of time that year.
Several years.
Yeah, but it was like that first year was like amazing, you know, because we trained together a lot.
Yeah. So that was the first time we did the training here in San Jose.
Yeah.
And back when it was Gold, and we did our first, you know, sessions together because I was trying to teach you what FSE 7 was about. Yeah. And it wasn't like, you know, people say it was cluster, you know, now that it's funny because somebody said to me about cluster training, but that's a, you know, or if it's just a high, like a pump sets or this or that. Yeah. And it's like high intensity meets high volume, and also the food around it. And then the supplements, you know, I'm, you know, obviously so big on natural supplements and putting all of that together. And it was like that first arm workout in January. And
yeah, you know what's crazy too is I'm going to mention is we were sampling the EVP.
Uh-huh.
Do you remember you were giving me? We called it the purple powder, and I remember thinking like, "Damn, like what is this shit?" Right? And you're like, "Just drink it." And to be honest, it didn't taste great at the time.
Yeah,
it was like a trial, and it was just in a white tub.
Yeah.
It was in the tubs I think you currently use, but you're like, just take it. It's going to make you full as, and I was like, damn, I'm so full, but it was the training too. Like it expanded everything. Those 7 sets at the end to blow up. I never had done that before.
Yeah.
And so that's funny because Evogen was kind of born. I don't even know what it was called at that point.
It was Evogen, but it was like I just came up with the name.
Yeah.
Because before that, I was, consulting for BSN.
Yeah.
And then I had just started, Evogen right after I was finished with BSN. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do my own thing. And then I was already, doing a lot of products and little, lots of different stuff for my guys. Phil was my human guinea pig when it came to some of the products. And then you were like, okay, what is this going to do? You're like, what and you'd always say, what is this shit?
Well, you're giving me a cocktail and I knew what I was taking most of the time. I worked with some of the better supplements. And then all of a sudden you're just mixing a drink for me in the corner and you're like, drink this. So I'm like, okay, am I working with a mad scientist at the same time as like, what's the protocols here, right? But that's kicked off. I mean, we trained and then we talked about, let's shoot this FST thing. And I think, the rest.
Yeah, but you forgot a big point. The first workout, you almost threw up doing arms.
Really?
Yeah.
See, I don't recall those days.
Yeah. You almost threw up. I remember, and you're like, bro, like I
don't train like this.
Yeah, I don't train like this. But it did also, in all due respect, it was also several months after the Olympia.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like the first hardcore training. It was like the beginning of the year. So you were just like, let's go. I want to do some good workouts. And that's what, like you said, that's what it was about. It wasn't about me taking over, being your trainer, like your full on coach. It was just like, let's get some workouts.
Yeah, no one had ever trained me to that point. Chris Aceto was my nutritionist, but he never structured a workout. It was like, okay, you do what you do. So there was the first time anyone instructed me how to work out from the very time I started at 18. So that was different in aspect of what I was, doing in the past.
Right. And I wanted you to get stronger and also to be able to, like, my whole thing was this: a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And I was putting together all the philosophies around the FSC7 method, but I also wanted to make sure that you understood what was going on. So I would always talk to you about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then what would happen, which was cool, was that you would implement it and see the change. And you're like, yeah, bro, I think this is kind of working. And, you're starting to get rounder, more upper chest because you're so wide, right? So it was always like, let's really build that shelf in that upper chest.
Yeah, so it wasn't shallow, yeah.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be shallow. And then as we kept going, it kind of became a little bit, I remember we ended up doing some stuff with the FSC7 video and everything else. And I think in July, I was at the USA, and that's when we got together. And it was at the
Flamingo Sandhill.
Yes,
gym.
It was there at the gym, and we trained. And then that's when you were still weren't on the fence on whether we were going to work together or not officially. And then you just came up and said, "Hey, look, man, I think it's best that you just kind of take this thing and let's do the prep." And that was kind of like right around the USA time, but make it more kind of concrete and official at that point. Because I remember I was there at the USA, and you came to the hotel, and we were at the guest hotel, and then we also trained and everything else. But it was one of those things where at that point it was kind of more just, okay, we're going to go into the show. And obviously when we went into it, I was getting you ready and I was getting Phil ready. And he just always told me, just bring him in his best, bring me in my best. And the thing about where you were at that time too, which is really, really crazy, was that, I remember Muscle Time, right? Was the big, one of the things.
Website.
Yeah, website. And it was like Get Big, it was Muscle Time, it was all those sites. And they had basically said that you wouldn't be in the top 5. You'd be lucky to be in the top 5 of that show coming up because of kind of your like on the way out. And I remember it affected you because you kept bringing it up. And then you said, like, all I know is I just got to come in, come
at
in
my best.
At my best. And that's what you said. Like, let's just, but my system was obviously very, very different because it was much different than what you did with Chris, because number one, the training, and we were constantly training together. And we were training as a team, kind of like I said, I was training you, but I was also training Phil, and you guys had good camaraderie. And it'd be very different than if it was like Kai or something like that, right? Because obviously Kai doesn't have the relationship like with Phil and whatnot. But it was one of those things that it made it very easy for me to be able, because everyone's like, well, how are you working with 2 top guys? And I said, because they get along, And so I think you guys fed off of each other. And one of the things is that you ended up going into that show knowing that if you crossed your T's and dot your I's. But I think the biggest thing that, people ask me is how was I different? So my question for you is, how was I different than what you were used to going into it for the last 12 weeks?
Cardio twice a day, which I never did. Step mill. Did step mill. I never used it before.
Right.
It was too much work. More food than ever.
The Hany special.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I always ate fish, but
right.
No protein powders, definitely no condiments, which I'd never used anyway, but you were particular about even my carbs. I was eating oatmeal in the morning. We switched to grits.
Yep.
And it was just an abundance of, it was more protein than I had, handled before. So, and you know what? You rode my ass. But you know what the funny thing is? When Muscle Time had that, Jay's not in the top 5, and I said, Hany, what do you think? You would never said to me, you're going to win, or you're going to be top 2, or you're going to be top, like, you never, there was that kind of uncertainty because you knew that I could come in at my best, but where are the judges going to put me, right?
Yep.
There was always that question, and I've noticed that even with the people you work with today, I always ask about your people. How do you think he's going to do? And you're never like, you never told me, Phil, he's going to smoke everyone. And I don't know what your discussions inside your circle is with him.
And she would tell you the same thing. I don't, but I just be honest. I'm not.
It's like you were uncertain.
Yeah.
And you made sure that you weren't, riding the dick like, hey, you're going to win this,
Yeah. Because I didn't want you.
And I was surrounded by that. A lot of my career from the rise of second, like a lot of people around me, like, you're going to win. So it was kind of nice to go into that show. It gave me more drive and focus and determination to be better because, you weren't like guaranteeing me anything because we didn't know what the body was going to unfold. Like we both never realized. And, I remember being in the hotel before I head to prejudging, and I remember Farronez took a picture on her phone, and I don't know what I looked like, and she goes, when she took the picture, she goes, holy shit. And when you showed me the picture, I mean, I never saw my body in that kind of condition from the backside, right? That's where I always was a loser in a lot of the competitions. And when she said that, that's when I said, I'm going to win the show. I knew right then. Yeah,
you looked at the picture and you said to me, who's that?
Yeah.
You literally didn't know it was you.
Yeah.
It was a back shot, and your Christmas tree, your glute hamstring tie-in and everything else.
Crazy, yeah.
Yeah, it was just insane. And you were like, who's that? And that was the thing. And then you were also concerned because you knew that Phil had gotten sick.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I was dealing with Phil getting sick, throwing up all night, and then making sure to try to get him balanced back out, and then being able to also try to bring you in your best. And so I was going back and forth between that. And so it was very, very difficult for me because it was just one of those things that it was going back.
Well, if you remember, Phil was actually hyped to probably be the front runner.
Yes.
Him and Dexter were going to beat me,
yes.
Right? So that was your star, really, according to everyone else. Like, we ripped the cover. Remember the Flex cover ended up being me ripping the two guys even Flex turned against me, Al and Donnelly, and like they weren't confident that I was going to come back. And I had a chip on my shoulder about that. I mean, I lost support of everyone. When you talk about someone's downside and, people not believing in you, I was the victim of that. Everyone gave up on me except, some of my sponsors and the people that were close to me that saw the progression over the time. Kevin Horton shot me 3 weeks out. He said, dude, no one's beating this, Yeah.
Yeah. Those black and white shots are absolutely epic. And I think that you started to build your confidence as we got closer, and because I would get you to send me pictures twice a day.
Yeah, it was very frustrating.
Yeah, because you weren't used to it.
Yeah, no one ever rode me like that before,
like Zorro.
I walked out on that stage that night, and I mean, I knew right then, as soon as I took the step up, I said, it's over, you know. I remember being backstage and Tamer and Tarek looking at me and just in awe, like when I took my clothes off and, you know, I was getting oiled up and everyone's like, holy, you know, this isn't the same guy. It's pretty good. It's a highlight of my career.
Yeah. It was, remember Dan seeing you backstage?
Yeah.
It was one of those things because, you know, you always look good from the front.
Yeah.
And they're like, he's always, how's he look from behind? It's like, show him.
Yeah.
You know, and you turn around and you just hit it. And Dan just was like, holy shit, this is going to be crazy.
Yeah. He was commentating the show at that point, you know, how he runs it, but.
Yep. How he runs the Olympia. But yeah, you're right. You're right. He was commentating that year. And it was crazy because it was kind of like just that little preview of like what you're about to look like in a few minutes because it was backstage. And one of the things is when you got up on stage, we're going to talk a little bit about the foot stomp and how that came to fruition because when you came out there, you had a really good idea. You had the new hair. That was the new hairstyle.
Yeah.
And then you're like, I got my stylist that's working on my hair. And so I see this hair. And at first I was like, I'll be honest with you, man. I'm used to the J slicked back. You know what I mean? That was at that point, that was kind of, you're known for that. And I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I'm going to like this, right? Like, this is like different.
Yeah.
I'm not used to Jay with the spiky hair. And your color was great. Color looked awesome. 09. And you're like, you know, and then you were sending me pictures from the house. I think Dave Burley was taking the photos. And then, you know, as we were carving up and you were drying out and everything started coming together. And I just, you know, I kept saying, hey, look, you know, I think we can get a little deeper here in terms of separation. Because I always would look at your midsection and I would always say, you know, like looking at photos and kind of studying your physique through the years, I always knew that there were certain body parts, like having certain separation through your abdomen and your abdominals, where I knew that, you know, at some point it starts to suck in. And then I kept saying, hey, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And you're like, no, we can go a little more. We can go a little more. And then obviously, you know, the eating, you know, the Hany special that we joke about, but it was a lot of food during the carb up.
Yeah. And it was fats for the first time. You know, I added like almond butter and avocado, which I never, ever in my diet ever had. And that alleviated, you know, the carb intake because, you know, I would, you know, be able to eat 1,000 grams of carbs and burn through the body. So we needed something to slow that metabolism because I have a fast metabolism. I eat a lot, even on a contest diet. And, you know, we were able to dial it down and I ended up the lightest body weight I had been in years. 254, I think, is what the weight ended up being, where we kind of fell the last weight I weighed myself. And, you know, that was it. History was made and I came out on stage. And
tell me about that. Tell me about when you were getting on stage, because when you were about walking on there, I mean, I know you mentioned it to me before, but just for the listeners, that was a very exciting point because everybody was just waiting, literally on the edge of their seats. And I mean, you know, the flashes and everything else, because I remember hearing gasps in the audience. Did you hear any of that?
Yeah, I knew because I had like people, I was still my hometown, right? So I think it was some rumblings. Jay looks good, you know, leading up and whatever else. And, you know, I came out there and the confidence was high, you know, new hairstyle, all that stuff. And, you know, the color was good. And I just walked out on stage. I remember just, you know, you hear that first reaction. And when I stood and I, you know, stood in the box, there's a box on stage where they tape it off. And I stood there and did the front relaxed. I locked in and the crowd went bananas. And I said, okay, this is my time. Right. And then I went through the transitions, you know, and did the poses and, you know, ended up with, before I did the ab and thigh, which was the last pose at the time, the most muscular didn't exist. I looked down at my leg, you know, and I was like, you know, let me see what kind of striations I have. Cause, you know, I always had in my left leg, crazy striations on the outer head. And I looked down at the leg and, you know, I flexed the leg And I looked at the audience like, okay, here it is. And they went crazy. And then I hit the ab and thigh. But I never realized when I locked that leg and I kind of looked down. And as I looked down, it was never a pose. This is the famous quad stomp. I actually never really tightened. I just kind of was like, when I put my head down, my abs kind of flexed a little bit just to be able to hit the leg. And Per Burnell and the rest of the crew locked that picture in. And it's one of the most memorable bodybuilding pictures of all time.
Yeah.
Quad stomp was born. Yeah, I dropped the heel and hit the stage, and there was like a thud, you know.
Yep.
And next thing you know, here we are. You know, it's victory again. You know, it felt great.
Yeah, it was cool because when you won that night, it was all that hard work, everything else, and there was so much buildup and so much pressure. And then the coolest thing that I realized that night, and I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back at it, is that you always had to split your fan base with Ronnie. And then obviously the whole thing, and you know, the second win, then not, you know, losing to Dexter. So it was, even when you won, the times you won, it wasn't a clear cut like straight firsts.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know
prior to that.
And then that year, not only did you get straight first, but what was cool was that fact that everybody was just like, holy shit. It was kind of like, there was no question. There was nobody else next to you that was even quite, you know what I mean? Like it was, besides Branch, which, you know, nothing to take anything away from Branch, because he looked great and he looked amazing.
He thought he should have won.
Did he?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You know, I mean, Branch, he still to this day says, shit, if you didn't work with Jay, I would have won. I would have been Mr. Olympia. And, you know, probably the case. But I do think that at the end of the day, the cool thing was that it was unanimous in terms of the eyes of the fans. The fans were just so supportive. And it was just like this overwhelming tidal wave of just fan support and sentiment. And it was like so much positivity that I've never seen. Because, you know, they would give you a hard time. I remember people go, yo, you're working with a refrigerator, you're doing this, like you're gonna, you know what I mean? And for me, I just block all that stupid shit out. But it was one of those things where I'm like, I never really realized there was so much kind of like hate, you know, because it's like in bodybuilding, they love you, then they hate you, then they love you again. And that's kind of what happened. But it became even so much more monumental, because when you won, it was like everybody was just like, people that even didn't, quote unquote, weren't your fans before, you know, are like, holy shit,
they had no choice. Yeah,
they had no choice.
It was the only convinced, like, the no question Mr. Olympia title I won out of the 4.
Right.
That was like, there was no like if and buts about it, right? And you know, that was a great feeling. It was the first time I felt it. But you know, the question was, what's next? How do you beat that?
Yeah.
And I think you and I sat back after the show, and
you texted me like 100 times.
Yeah,
I think I still have those text messages. Like every 10 minutes you were texting me like, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I can't believe it.
Because I was so appreciative, because, you know, all the struggles we went through. I mean, remember, it was a year of, not quite a year, but let's say it was 9 months, right? You know, there were times I hated you, you know, because of the pressure, and like, this is what it takes. And I was kind of, you know, I'm a stubborn guy. So I was like, what does he know? You know, I've been at this for so long, but I let you take the lead of it. And I love the fact that we went into that show and we didn't really know the outcome, right? It wasn't like, hey, you're going to win this thing. And when I was able to do it, it just made it that much better, because it was kind of a surprise, but not really a surprise to both of us. Because when we knew we got down to the last day, we knew it was going to happen, right? But, you know, you just never know with the judges, right?
Right.
And, you know, but I displayed the best package, you know, arguably the best I've ever had, right? And I knew at that point it was like, okay, how do we beat this? But at the same time, it revitalized my career, and it gave me the opportunity of that much more popularity. Like you said, I think like that, by that time, Ronnie Coleman was way gone, and I captured now his mass audience and solidified myself as undeniably the best bodybuilder on the planet. And that was a great feeling. Great feeling. I never had felt that before, even in 06. That's why I always said, what was your best, greatest victory? Like, audience, like it's the 09, because there was just so much gratifying appreciation for that body and that preparation, being the underdog again, like worse than ever. Like I had never been that much of an underdog when no one predicts me in the top 5, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how everyone's like, Jay's never going to come back.
Right.
Even my own sponsors, some of them were like that, and that's why, like, after I signed a big deal with MD and, we kind of just kept rolling with it, but I knew it would never peak. That 2010 wasn't the same, and then, the rest is kind of history. I lost to Phil in 11
but even with 2010, we talked about that.
Yeah.
Remember?
We talked about it, and, you said you're really going to have to dig deep because, you
set such a high bar.
Yeah. And we weren't able to capture that. And I think there's a lot of questions, you said, well, you didn't train as hard, or, you got lazy or what.
No, I didn't say
maybe there is, but I think, I just was like, I know I'm not going to beat this.
Right.
Deep down, your inner conscience tells you that. Mm-hmm. And I think also Phil Heath was becoming great. Mm-hmm. In 09, he would have been right there with me.
Yes.
It wouldn't have been Branch or Dexter, I don't think, right there.
I agree.
Would have been Phil, because Phil looked phenomenal leading up to that show, like very dangerous. So when he came in 10, I mean, that was a split contest too, where a lot of Phil Heath people were like, Phil could have won that contest. And then obviously in 11, I was convinced more in 11 I was going to win it. And then of course the bicep thing happened or whatever.
Yeah. No, I think looking back at it, it was always just, for me, it wasn't whether you were going to work hard, you're working hard or not. It was just always, and I tell this to anybody, if you look at Ronnie Coleman, if you look at Lee Hany, if you look at Dorian Yates, how many shows out of all of their wins did they ever really peak? Maybe 2 or 3, right? There's like the top 2 or 3 different shows. And I knew that was such a peak coming off of that and off of the 2009 finish, that when you went into 2010 and you had, you and Phil went 1 and 2, I knew that it was going to be very, very tough to be able to start to repeat that look of 2009, because it's just really, how many people have ever gone to their peak and then their next year gotten better than that? Really,
Yeah, I think a lot of people hit the peak and then it's like 4 years later they peak again. Like, correct. I think bodybuilder peaks twice in the high reign. And, I'm moving my late 30s. Phil Heath is in his early 30s. Listen, I don't give a shit. Age makes a huge difference, right? Yeah. Maturity happens, but at the same time, when you're fresh, like your body just clicks a lot easier. And it wasn't getting easier. Like I was having trouble eating the food. Yeah. I was having trouble like staying full. And, if my food wasn't in and you were on my ass about eating, like that was my weak link, was my body needed a lot of food.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I didn't get it, it didn't look the same.
And that's where Carrie helped.
Yeah.
Carrie helped a lot. And she really, and we talk about this all the time, how important it is to have a strong woman, or a strong partner if you're a woman with a male partner, or same-sex partner, whatever, just any partner, whoever it is. It's so important that you have somebody supporting you. And Carrie was always there. I mean, you look at your old videos, she was always there and everything else.
She trained with me. Yeah,
and I think a lot of your success is because of her. I mean,
mm-hmm. The balance was there, right? So, you need, it was very individual at times, but many times, like, you need that team, right? You mentioned that 09 team I put together was like impeccable, right? You couldn't really ask for a better. Like, I had the training partners, was filming, Swole Monkey TV for YouTube, which no one was doing at the time. But they were there for me. And then she was there to make sure the food was being eaten. And okay, this is what we need leading into the last week. She was running around and she was helping with the color and doing all that stuff. And she knew the routine. I mean, she'd seen me at my high, low, winning, losing. She had been there, so she knew how much it meant.
Yeah, it was amazing, because to really see how important that really is, and she was able to be an integral part of that. that it's really important to have a person to be able to help you like at that level. And again, like you said, it was kind of the dream team because everybody in there, you know, even Dave, I used to, you know, and Dave, you know, I was never buddies with Dave. I became friends with Dave through you. And it was funny because I was just like in awe of it. And you were just like, this is like when you get a dream team like the Lakers or the Warriors or somebody like that together, it was really good because it really made a big difference in every aspect of the prep. And going into 10, you know, winning with Phil nipping at your heels. And then 11, you had come in, you said, hey, I'm going to do one more. And I was starting to get a little bit like, okay, we don't want to get too long in the tooth, but do you feel good? And you said yes. And I felt like, honestly, like you were better than 2010 going into it. I really do. I think that I'm like, okay, this is kind of like going into that 2009 direction again. And then until the bicep tear and when you got hurt and all that. Other thing.
I mean, I have pictures leading into 11, bro, that, I mean, they're just astounding. And I was going through a divorce at that time. You know, I moved out, which a lot of people didn't know, in June. And I was living at the Mandarin, you know, downtown.
The Mandarin Oriental.
Yeah, and on the Strip. So I was doing my prep out of there, and I was training at, you know, late night. We were training at like midnight. And for the first time, I was battling, like, you know, not being in a large space, although I was still going back and forth to my home. Carrie and I were on good terms. You know, remember my dog died.
Yeah.
Right then.
Scrap.
No, Trace. The big
Trace.
Airedale,
that's right.
The Airedale Terrier.
Yeah.
And you know, that was when I was actually shooting video with I was shooting with Per Burnell, and then of course I was going through the divorce, so I kind of felt like, and then, you know, of course my contract was coming up with Muscle Tech. They informed me that, hey, we're going to cut your contract by like 2/3, and I was like, man, like this is all going bad, you know. And then the bicep tear 2 or 3 weeks out, you know, doing a photo shoot, and me thinking it was just a strain. And I remember sending pictures to you, and you're like, bro, this is not good.
Yeah.
You know, it was swollen.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And of course it was disastrous by the time I drained the water, and it was Black and Blue came about. And then of course everyone thought I shot my arm, right? So that was a kind of a hard point for me. I finished second. Then we had to go to, you know, India right after. And although I cleaned up a little bit for India, you know, Phil had won his first. So I was super stoked for Phil, man. Right. Like he looked phenomenal. I think that was the best Phil we've ever seen aesthetic wise. I mean, we talk about 01, my look. I think that was, you know, Phil's greatest, you know. I don't know. It would have been a tough show. I mean, I still think that if I was on point, I would have beat Phil just because I had the momentum. I was Mr. Olympia. I was bigger, and bigger, you know, with some aesthetics wins. And I think that leading into that show, I did have enough in the tank. And I had already stated I was pretty much retiring after 5 victories. And, you know, it just didn't happen.
Well, I think that, like you said, Phil just started catching his stride. And at that point, like you said, Phil then didn't double peak again until 2013. And then that's when he got the one call out. And 11 and 13 were really, really good. And having the injury obviously just was such a, you know, it was such a huge setback. At that point, things, you know, got weird at that point, right? Because it was like a lot of that uncertainty, a lot of some of that negativity creeping in and all that stuff. We went into India, and the good thing is, you know, going backwards, India, when we had some really good times in India, like the year before, and everything else when we went out there, and I gotta, you know, when we talk about the times when we were all together. During that period between 2009 and let's say 2011, those 2 years, when we were shooting the DVD, man, I'll never forget when Phil passed out on the chair.
Yeah.
And you were on the phone, and I got to see if I can find that video. It's somewhere, and we would just play, you know, we would haze Phil, right? It was like hazing Phil, and you're like, get him, you know? And I was just like, get the little, you know, and he'd pass out in between us, and we're watching in your theater room.
Yeah.
And then I just put phone on, and then he's asleep, and I would just be like, wake the fuck up. And he was just, you know.
His eyes would pop out of his head and like he would get so mad, you know. But yeah, I laugh about those because he'd come to my house. He played like
Guitar Hero.
And he was like a little kid, man. Like, and, you know, we'd just have these conversations. And then, you know, as we traveled, we always had the laughs, right? And, you know, we were just in a different realm then, right? And, you know, then of course passing the torch. And I remember for years, like even after Phil his confidence wasn't like, he was a fan of bodybuilding still. So for him to win, you know, I think he felt the same way I felt when Ronnie, it was like, damn, Jay lost, but I just won. And, you know, he was super stoked. And I knew he would win anyway because of the bicep, right? They told me, they said, you know, you can't win like this. And, you know, I was so happy for him. It was just, you know, that was like, I was able to speech. I mean, what Mr. Olympia was able to lose and give a speech for the current, you know, it never really happened, right?
Right.
And,
because you were so mentally prepared.
Yeah. And you know, a lot of things started happening. Then like, I remember we were approached leading into, you know, after I lost, you know, they're like, you got to come back for 12. And I had the surgery in February because I had guest appearances like crazy after the Cheru Classic. And then Generation Iron approached us about the movie. You know, they originally reached out to me and they wanted me to play a major role in the Generation movie. And then, you know, Phil I remember exactly, they came to see us in New York City. And, you know, Phil and I had the discussion in the W Hotel there. And that's when, you know, they wanted to launch the movie for 2012. But I said, I'll exit because I'm not going to compete. You know, I knew I wouldn't be able to get back. And, you know, I eventually came back in 2013, which was, you know, just to get back up there again. It was never really a plan like I'm going to come win this title back. It was more of like, hey, I just need to exit the way I want to exit and not be forced out by an injury.
Well, and then when you decided to come back, how was that? Was that something that you were just like 50-50 about, or is it because I know that you were launching a brand at the time?
Yeah, it was, you know, that was another reason too, is, you know, I wanted the hype, right? And I didn't even really start training for that thing until, you know, June. Mm-hmm. So I literally prepared June to September.
Why? Why did you wait so long to prepare for that show?
I don't know, because I was touring on my tour bus. If you remember, I had
that's right,
my GNC
with
and military tours. Yeah, so Jess, you know, my buddy became my driver. So I was basically flying in and off. He would get the bus to one location. I would fly in, ride the bus for a certain distance, and then when he had to do the long breaks from certain states, we did our path across. We did a tour from all the way from east to west and back over like a 4 or 5 month period. You know, I was flying back and forth, and I you know, it was just impossible to train. You know, I was in a different gym at midnight. I was doing meet and greet sometimes twice a day.
Well, because we didn't work together that year.
No, we didn't.
Right.
You know, and I knew, you know, and partly the reason is, you know, I knew I wasn't going to give it 100%, right? So when I made the decision, I brought in Chris Aceto, who I had originally worked with at the very end. You know, I had actually talked to like Chad Nichols. I mean, everyone wanted to
work with you.
We wanted part of this success story. I just knew that I wasn't going to give it 100% because of where I was starting from. Mm-hmm. You know, I didn't have the density. Mm-hmm. That's the one thing. When I stepped away with the bicep, I thought, okay, I'm done.
Right.
And I had the surgery and I started going out. I just finished my divorce. I'd you know, out dating and partying and doing whatever in Vegas, experienced that for the first time. I had no mindset of anything. So mentally, we talk about the mental game. If I didn't have that mentality, it was impossible. So, you know, when I did come back in 2013, you know, I rushed it and I wasn't going to give it my all. So there was no reason to bring you in for it. But we never had really the discussion. I think that's where, you know, it was just a little awkward for a time.
Yeah.
And obviously you had Phil, and he was, you know, no one was beating Phil Heath. Like,
right.
Come on. Like, you know, he had really just kind of got his stride, like you mentioned. But I thought I could have a good showing. Mm-hmm. Like I thought, okay, I can be in the top, you know, 3, 4,
right.
5, whatever. Even at what percent, you know, I didn't see anyone that was just drastically better. And, you know, as I prepared and, you know, I ended up finishing 6th. You know, rushed prep and, was it a gift at 6? Maybe. I mean, Rami and Rolly looked good that year too. But, Sean Roden had come into the scene by then, and I didn't think that he was a world beater. I never imagined him to be Mr. Olympia at that point. And I just, my respect was always to Phil Heath, and, we were still close at that time. So, they were all psyched to have me on stage because I had, done a lot of things since then. I stayed on, the publicity trail and, finished my last Olympia, but I knew that was it.
That was it at that point. Well, I mean, it was a long, great career, and you had a lot of historical moments. And on top of that, the biggest thing that I knew you were always very keen on is being financially locked in. I mean, was that because your upbringing and everything was always the farm, always, like I talking to you was always like talking to a guy that was broke, because that you had that mentality, like you're always broke. And which is, I have that similar type of mentality, but with you, it was even another degree. What's that like? Did that ever change? Because you still feel that way?
I'm still to this day, like, I don't, although money, if you put a scale, where money lies on my scale, it would be closer to the 10th spot than the top 3 or 4. And because my life doesn't involve like certain things that others strive for, right? I did a lot of things early in my life and established a lot of things early, and I've kind of set myself, I've done many things through my career that given me financial freedom. But my fear of being broke is what drove me. Okay. My fear of losing drove me. My fear of not being accepted drove me. That's what made me who I was. I grew up on a farm, 7 kids. My dad, raised all of us kids, and, we weren't financially free in that sense, but my dad did a great job for what he could. And in the beginning, I was a starving bodybuilder trying to make money. I couldn't afford anything. The food was expensive. I worked odd jobs. We talk about the relationship with Carrie. She worked 2 jobs to help support the bodybuilding in the beginning. We shared a car. And then, we rented an apartment, and, slowly I started to transition into, opportunities, and a lot of the opportunities come from the relationships that I had. And I was able to, get involved with many, many things. But at the same time, like, we were rock bottom. Like, how are we going to pay for things when we went out on our own after leaving my dad's house? We lived together. Carrie actually moved with me when we were like 18 or 19. And then eventually we had to exit and go on our own. And, like I said, I was trying to chase this bodybuilding thing. I was going to college at the time. Like, everyone struggles a little bit. But as it progressed, I became more and more successful, and that always gave me drive. And, I was always wanted to be like a goal setter, and I wanted to be like the guy that was like, okay, I'm going to solidify this. And people told me from day one, you'll never make money in bodybuilding. They said, don't waste your time. And I said, I'm going to be the one to prove it wrong. And still to this day, I hear it all the time, like, oh, bodybuilding's broke and whatever. But the truth is like, I think there's more money today than back then. It's just that you're not going to be handed that money.
Right. You're not going to get the big contracts like you used to get.
And there was only a couple bodybuilders on the planet that ever got handed big money. And that was myself and Ronnie Coleman. And because you were in the middle of some of those deals.
Yes.
And it was big money, right?
Yeah. Millions.
Yeah. So...
It was a different era.
And those days are done.
Right.
But you can still go out and you can create your own branding. Right. And do it all. And that's kind of what I've done. I've taken advantage of, I think if anyone, what I've set the standard for is like, I capitalized on being a very successful bodybuilder. And I feel I could have been a better bodybuilder if I didn't pursue some of that financial success. I could have been a better bodybuilder, but I chose to kind of ride the middle, right?
Right. Between the financial and the actual placings.
And, I said, I always say, I'm one to say, well, I'm not going to keep doing this because it's very taxing. But then, 5 months later, I'm still doing the same thing.
Right.
I mean, I told you when I quit bodybuilding, I'll never T-bar row or bent row or deadlift again. And I do them every single back or leg workout.
And you said you'll never go on and do all this touring ever again.
And I love it.
And you still do it.
Because I love the fans and I appreciate what they've given me. I mean, I just did an appearance last week, 3-hour appearance scheduled in New Jersey. I actually flew over for the day and I was on a time constraint. And it was scheduled. I ran 2.5 hours over. It was 12 to 3. I ran 12 to 5:30. My flight was at 7. I barely made the flight home, but that's what I do.
Right.
Because I just love it that much. But I still have that fear of like, I'm Jay Cutler. Like, where's my legacy stand? And it's not so much financial at this point. Like, I'm still a little frugal about certain things, but I'll spend money on, things that people wouldn't expect me to spend money on. But I want to, like, it's just like with my products and my reputation, I'll go out of my way so I have the solid, like, I want people to walk away with the experience rather than how much can it put in my pocket, right?
Right.
And that's what I love, because everyone needs motivation these days, and especially what we just went through. And, I've learned to appreciate a lot more since I retired. It's easy to now look from a distance over my career and realize how great I actually was at periods. Mm-hmm. And I also now can truthfully sit in front of you. And if you question, hey, on that time that I questioned your, like, how focused you were, it's easy for me to say, you know what, I slacked a little bit in this sense. And like you mentioned, 2010, like, I think that 2009 rose me to here, and I saw no vision past that. So it kind of fell back. And then I think when there was a little controversial in 10 with Phil, like, I think it peaked me back up. And then of course, circumstance, I wasn't able to be as great as I could have. But underdog worked better for me.
It did.
Always.
Yeah. I could tell what you're...
Winning was a curse for me.
Yeah.
Because I got satisfied very easily.
Yeah. That was something that I definitely saw in the situation that had happened in the past, and while we worked together as well. But, and just keeping you going. And I think obviously you weren't used to having somebody ride you.
No. I mean, no one to this day, since no one's ever spoken to me or been that much of a relevancy towards the success. I kind of make decisions, right? I'm my own boss. I own every branding I do now and make decisions. I mean, I'm 47 years old, so there's not much people can really dictate in our life, right? We're self-employed, we're entrepreneurs. So it's kind of, I still try to listen to what people say, because there's a lot more experts than me when it comes to outside things. But as far as my life and the direction, I feel I have a great grasp on that. And I'm happy that the competitive side is out of it in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're now with Angie. You've been with Angie now for a while.
4 years.
4 years. You guys, it's awesome seeing you on social media and being so happy and balanced out, and still no kids, right? Is it
no children? It's kind of weird, man. I just never.
And when I say no kids, right, meaning that no plans, because I obviously know you don't have any kids, but my whole thing, or no, that we know about. There's the J smile. Yeah. The biggest thing is just, is it just, did you always know that you didn't want to?
You know what? I'm there was times, I mean, I just, with the busy schedule and, I definitely during the pandemic and slowing down, it made me realize, like, again, there's a lot more to life than being on the road every weekend. It gets very old. But I feel I have a commitment, right? But I never say never. Okay, never going to say never. But today, if you were asking me, there's no real plans, I mean, there's a few more steps I'd like to take before, I really kind of lose a little selfishness. I'm selfish. I'm going to be honest with that, because I'm still striving for greatness in certain areas of my life. And, whatever happens. I like things to be a little more, natural. That's all.
What else is going to happen, what do you see yourself in the next 5-10 years right now?
It's always a question people ask me. And, you know, man, I just, you know, I'm pretty happy. Like when I wake up every day and I feel good about my life, meaning I travel, you know, I feel like I've achieved what I needed to in order to be in that place. And, you know, we always talk about, I mean, today, prior to this, you know, you and I sit and discussed all our things that maybe are on the table for like business.
Mm-hmm.
But the most important thing is like to be happy, right? And no one ever asks, you know, when you run into someone, they say, hey, how's business? You know, how's your family? How's this and that? But you know what? No one ever asks you, are you happy? And truthfully, like, I think I'm one of the few Mr. Olympias or bodybuilders that was able to say, you know what, I had what I consider a storybook career in a sense, where I was able to achieve what I all set out to do. And, you know, after losing it and coming back and winning it, being the only guy in history, and then being able to continue to do what I love. And that's, you know, be involved in the arena. Like I do supplements and, you know, I promote the events and do all that stuff. And I'm still doing the meet and greets. I work with the military prior to the COVID stuff. I mean, I'm working on doing that again. And, you know, I just want to travel. You know, I want to catch up with, you know, the friends that I had. I would love to relive some of these times that you, I, and Phil had. Like, you know, you always try to chase that, you know, it's too far maybe sometimes, but, you know, we had some good times, and it's just good to reconnect with a lot of people and just be happy in life. That's all.
Yeah. Well, that's super important, especially I think this pandemic has showed us to appreciate what we have. There's some, you know, you just never know when your time is up in this world with this situation, mm-hmm. because obviously, you know, I went through some tough times personally, losing my father with this pandemic. But the thing that I want to just say is thank you. Thanks for coming out, making this special, brother. It's, you know, we never really got a chance to go down and relive memory lane in person. You know, you're always busy. I'm always busy. Mm-hmm. You're running your company. I'm running my company. And it's always one of those things. So for you to take the time out, fly out here from Vegas to do this podcast with me and relive the moments, I really appreciate it, because it tells the mental mindset of a champion, and not just on stage, but to become somebody who's financially independent. And that creates a lot of different happiness. So for those people that don't follow Jay for whatever reason, obviously we'll put all the links and everything in there. Make sure you guys, if you have any other questions, we might end up doing a follow-up.
Yeah, there's so much more to go over. I mean, the afterlife of bodybuilding is, you know, it's so much more than just, hey, I finished competing, and, you know, the inner person it's changed a lot. You know, my goals are definitely different. You know, people, I mean, I walked today and ran into someone, and they're like, man, you still look great. And, you know, there's still those questions. Are you going to come back and compete? And, you know, I'm scratching my head. I'm like, I'm 47 years old. And like, why? That's how crazy bodybuilding is, because someone like a Dexter Jackson jinxed all of us with like, right. Oh, there's no age limit, right?
Right.
And Albert Beckles and these guys. But that ship has sailed, man. Like I'm enjoying watching the new guys, the new generation, Hany, you know, who's amazing. And, you know, we talked a lot about that. I'm still a fan, as you can tell, of it. And, you know, I love to watch the progression, but, you know, and I love the new divisions too. I'm not going to lie. Like, I'm not one of these bodybuilders that looks at men's physique or classic and thinks, oh, you know, those aren't real bodybuilders, because some of those guys train pretty damn hard, right?
Yeah.
So there's so much more now that, you know, we've experienced, because it's been 11 years since I won my last title, which is amazing to me. And it's literally taken me 10 years to understand what that journey was, because I reminisce all the time. And, you know, I appreciate you bringing me back into a little bit. And I'm glad that we had some great history together and continue. Hopefully, you know, we'll be able to have some more in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming. Hany Rambod. And my special guest, 4-time Mr. Olympia, the legend Jay Cutler. And that's the truth.
Till next time.